Ja.
Sure. My name is Khulud Darabne from Hashd University, Jordan. It's a great pleasure to chair this session titled Constructed Identities, the Agency of Children and Young People. It's clear to all that refugees' children protection is the responsibility of all society section. Government and state agency as well as non-government agency all must work in harmony to develop policies and strategies to enhance refugees' children rights in all relevant to enhance refugees' children rights such as education, delivering services, to create a safe environment for these children to grow and learn in order to invest their abilities to have a good future for raising to be a good person in the future. In our session we have 5 papers and I will give each one 10 or 10 minutes. I think it's good to introduce his or herself, as well with 40 minutes for the question and discussions. We will start with Erin.
My name is Erin Sarouat. I'm from Egypt. I work for Tartizon as a project officer. It's an organization aims to supporting and protecting children through child rights convention. I work in a project called Protection Children Who Work in Agriculture. My topics programs for the development of identity. Next is the situation. The situation of the organization related to children, programs, recommendation. Recommendations and finally challenge. These programs aim to support, number one, support and improve children's identity and develop their skills, discover their talents, third, get them to acquire information about the protection mechanism. The target group of these programs is working children, dropouts, and school children from 8 to 16 years of age. Program number one, child to child. Aim to develop the children social, mental, and psychological growth, and merging educated children with literate children to achieve children awareness through getting the children to identify their community problems through 6 steps. Step number one, identify the community problems. Number two, get the children to collect information and data by using different tools such as interview, focus group, questionnaires, and so on. Number three, analyze the information and present this information in a creative way. For example, a play, painting, and song, and so on. Number four, get the children to plan the activity, then they implement this activity, and finally evaluate this activity to get the positive and the negative points as well as lesson learned. Program number two, SCREAM. I think we make presentation of SCREAM in the first panel. SCREAM, I will brief about SCREAM. Through this program, the children's skills and capabilities are developed to address other problems such as poverty, dropout. SCREAM make develop to children in capabilities and in their talent, skills, and so on. Program number 3 called Aflatun. I think Aflatun we make a presentation in the panel, but through this program, the children in Egypt learn about themselves and their rights and saving and so on. Aflatun is beginning in Egypt from 2006, I think, or more, I don't know. But we used Aflatun with child labor to learn them the rights and how to acquire these rights. The situation of the organization related to children programs, most of these programs are focused in Arabian areas, ignoring the rural areas and slums, which are the neediest areas for these programs. Most of these organization programs adopt and focus on health, education, and nutrition programs, but activity related to children's rights and identity comes second. My recommendation about that, the social and cultural policies should cooperate together to deal with important issues and cases such as the child's mother's tongue, loyalty, identity, discrimination, and protecting the child's culture and mentality. The state should adopt general policies which are related to the child's identity to achieve human development through providing with programs and funding. Challenge globalization and economic policies that affect minds and widen the gap between poor children and rich children. Number 2, the element planning for programs related to identity, the lack of agreement and understanding among social upbringing institution in the selecting suitable programs related to identity. The educational institutions focus only on educational issues, and there is the lack of programs that are related to development of identity and scientists. And this SCREAM project with children labor, working with children, and this child-to-child approach is a photo to children how to solve their problems.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you. Ellen talked about program for development identity. She talked about 3 programs, child-to-child, SCREAM, and Aflatun.
Yes.
She talked about some recommendation and challenges about programs addressing identity. Some of this limitation is the program related to identity. There's no program focus in this area.
Yes.
The programs focus also focus on education and health, on education and
nutrition, not focus about the child rights or identity.
Thank you. Shall we move to Farida?
F5.
How do I go back? Sorry. Okay,
Right.
Okay, so. Okay.
So that, she wants to go back.
Okay, I'm Farida. I'm currently a master's student at LSE studying human rights, and I worked for 7 months as a legal advisor for refugees, and then worked as a research assistant at Human Rights Watch, and worked a bit, and I've been working a bit since 2007 with 3 children. So really my presentation will really reflect on my work as a legal advisor. I will try to present the situation of refugees, like I will do my best. I would say I probably am a bit biased because I worked as a legal advisor. And in my original paper, I really tried to kind of to analyze the situation according to law, and really ask the question of the RSD interviews, and try to really look at whether children have been through terrible conditions before coming here, and a lot of them were trafficked, and then they came here and faced a lot of problems with accommodation, education, a lot of issues that we covered. Or then, if it's fair to ask them to sit in a refugee status determination, and then take the interview, and then accordingly decide on, take really harsh decisions. So, okay, so I start with presenting their case, and then I'll probably end up with the same question that will be open for discussion on whether should we look for something else, whether RSD interviews is the only thing we are trapped in, should we take something else. So here's the outline. I will start with the problems they face when they register to UNHCR. Then I'll go to accommodation, access to financial assistance, health services, education, trafficking, and detention. So according to the 1953 Memorandum of Understanding with UNHCR, UNHCR is the person, is the entity that does the RSD interview, and through its implementing partners, they provide humanitarian services like access to financial assistance, healthcare, and a lot of other services. So Egypt, as a developing country, the government really doesn't have the capacity to take these decisions, so UNHCR is the body who takes it. So during the presentation, I'm not attacking any entity. I know that UNHCR in this context is probably the government. So, yeah. Okay, so when children refugees come to Egypt, there is no system of accommodation and no outreach system set to them, neither by UNHCR nor by the government. So basically, they come, they find themselves completely like in very miserable conditions, and unlike many other countries, it's not guaranteed that they get accommodation. And children under 16, they have to be accompanied by adults, but unlike other systems, they're not guaranteed a legal guardian. So in many cases, this adult is usually someone from the a community member, or just anyone. And in many cases, they get exploited by this person because they accompany the child to get access to the financial assistance that is guaranteed to children. And usually it takes 6 weeks before registration. This means that if stopped by police, they are detainable. And it's approximately a year from the date of registration to the RSD interview, which means that they can't be resettled. Accommodation. Again, there is no system of accommodation. Children refugees, they get 400 Egyptian pounds a month. This is guaranteed, even though the policy at this point is being amended. But and they're expected with the 400 Egyptian pounds to find accommodation and to cover like the living expenses. And like 4 months ago, there was this huge wave of Eritreans coming to Egypt and getting trafficked into Sinai. And so in 1 month, we had 900 cases of children getting trafficked into Sinai and faced like a lot of torture and a lot of. So this is a small quote that really. The reason why I chose this quote is because it tells a lot about the suffering they face in Egypt, and the fact that in the end they're left alone. A lot of them stay in the same place, a lot of them stay in the same house, and they've all been through torture with no psychological support, with nothing, with no, with very limited access to healthcare. So in the end, what we have is a group of tortured children just staying together in the house. Most of them are afraid to go out. Most of them just have a lot of psychological issues. So yeah. Okay, financial assistance and healthcare. So as I mentioned before, the children refugees, they used to receive 400 Egyptian pounds a month. This policy is actually in the process of being amended, and now it used to be according to age, and now they're changing it according to vulnerability. And this is, as far as I understand, to avoid avoid doing age assessments, which I understand is very difficult to do. But at the same time, such a policy will probably means that a lot of children who should be receiving financial assistance will not be receiving any. So there's limited access to psychological support, and they have constant struggle with finance. Here's also like another quote from the same group. The previous quote was from a 17-year-old child. This one from a 16-one, and it's also like emphasizes that the fact that they're scared to leave the house. They get nightmares, and basically there's no follow-up. Nothing is being done about it. Education. I think we've covered it a bit yesterday, but just a quick wrap. Refugees are unable to, they don't go to public schools. Instead, we have this called refugee schools, and they mainly accept the Sudanese refugee schools. Some Somalis get into refugee schools, but a very limited number. And basically, for those non-Arabic speakers, non-English speakers, there are almost no schools. And secondary education is almost also non-existent. So they end up working in the informal sector, very difficult to get a work permit, so end up working as child laborers, and they get into the same vicious cycle of exploitation. Trafficking. A lot of children get trafficked, and for example, 4 months ago, and we received 19 trafficked children. This is a very big number, and this is the documented number that we have, and I'm sure there's a lot more, and a lot of trafficked children who didn't move to Cairo. These are the numbers I have for Cairo. And the old regime refused to acknowledge the existence of trafficking networks. I hope the new regime will. And the situation is getting worse and worse every day. At this point, I'm talking about a very specific period, like this month, 4 months ago, the traffickers said that the sums of trafficking that the traffickers demanded have increased from $2,500 in 2009 to as much as $30,000. This is according to a report written by Human Rights Watch. And then a lot of them, especially in Sinai and other areas, and in Cairo, they get detained by police because, first of all, there's a major problem: the fact that for the yellow, a lot of policemen, they don't recognize the yellow card as an identity card, and a lot of them get detained. They're denied access to UNHCR, even though this is, of course, against the law. And in most cases, they're held in police stations, and police stations that are not equipped to receiving refugees. So most of the time, it's Qanatat prison, Sinai, Ismailia, and Suez police stations. And by law, there are only four prisons that they can be taken to. And in these prisons, there's very limited, like there's not sufficient ventilation, the cells are tiny, very limited food resources, water. It's basically called as a police station, so it's not equipped to receiving refugees. And then after all this, they most of the time end up going through the RSD interviews. I don't have an alternative, so I'm not offering anything else. I'm not sure what the solution really is, but I'm sure that putting them in, that they have to go through the RSD interviews, where they have to go to remember every detail and everything that happened to them in the country of origin. I don't think it's probably the solution, and it's probably not the fair thing to do. So I'm just posing a question to everyone, and maybe we can take it further and try to come, I don't know, maybe try to think of alternatives instead of just being stuck in the system. And okay, I'm done. But throughout the presentation, I know that a lot of efforts are being done to kind of to provide services and to make the situation better. So I'm not trying to be all negative, but I'm just trying to present this.
Thank you, Farida. Farida talked about the child refugees children situation in Egypt and with regard to accommodation, education, and another aspects in their situation. Since we can move to Mr. Jason Hart. If you can introduce yourself and your paper.
Yes. How do I actually? It's just like a mouse. Okay, well, I'm a little bit kind of perplexed how to proceed, because the title of the panel uses the notion of agency, but I'm not sure that we all have the same understanding of what we mean by agency. In Arabic, it's not wikale, it's not agency in that sense, which I think perhaps people might assume. Agency we're talking about is the ability of young people to influence their circumstances. The possibility that they can be social actors, that they can be subjects and not just objects. Yes, I think that's something that's been very important to childhood studies, really in Europe since the early 1990s. But I'm not certain from my experience that it's necessarily an issue that's part of discussion in other parts of the world when people think about and talk about young people. So, I don't know, the challenge perhaps here is to develop a common understanding of what we mean by notions such as agency. Very profound. It's very much a part of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which, as we know, one of the 4 principles is participation. Well, participation, the very notion of participation, is based on an idea, an assumption, that children are not simply objects with needs to be met, but are subjects of rights who need to be and entitled to be consulted about what happens in their lives and who are able to act in ways that positively improve their lives. It's a very, very fundamental notion, but as I say, I'm not sure it's a notion or concept that's very clearly understood or that we have a common understanding of in different contexts. It's absolutely not the meaning wikale. It's not agency in that sense in Arabic. So let me just give you a brief, and everyone's entitled to shout at me if I go past 10 minutes. A colleague of mine did a lot of work with young people, unaccompanied, coming to the UK, claiming asylum. Right? And the UK the situation has been that if you're judged to be under 18 years old, then you are given leave to remain until your 18th birthday or thereabouts, and then you have to go forward and claim asylum, and your case is judged at that age. So it's very, very important that you are considered to be 18. Yeah? So the situation is that for many young people, they don't have documentation to prove their age, and therefore they enter into a process where some official from the UK government has to assess their age and does an interview to try and understand that. So this colleague of mine, one particular case that I think brings out big issues about agency and how we understand young people's abilities. A 15-year-old from Angola, young woman, known as, she used the name Maria, it wasn't her real name. She witnessed her parents being killed. She herself was sexually violated. She escaped with her 8-year-old niece, traveled across the country, survived all kinds of difficulties over many months, eventually, with the assistance of a church organization, was put on a flight with her niece and came to the UK, and then entered into this discussion about how old she was. And when she described what had happened and what she'd done and how she'd looked after her niece, the authorities said, well, there's no way you can be 15, because a 15-year-old cannot do this. Yeah, a 15-year-old is not capable of doing what you've done. You have to be at least 18, and therefore pushed her out of access to any services and into a situation where she had to claim asylum as a 15-year-old. In the event, she was supported and she made an appeal, and eventually it was acknowledged that she perhaps was under 18. But the important point, there's many issues that raises, but one of the issues is how do we understand the capacity of young people? Very much was in the eye of the official, what they saw, what they perceived, what their assumptions were. And all of us, in some way, have assumptions about what we understand to be the abilities of young people. And that's what we're talking about when we think about agency. What do we mean by agency? Where do we see young people being agentive, acting to influence their circumstances, and where don't we see that? I've only got 2 slides, I think. So it's often, children's agency is often discussed from 2 perspectives. First of all, a normative perspective. So this is from people who very much want to demonstrate that children are not just passive objects, they're active subjects. Yeah? Their children are discussed and promoted as agentive. It's part of a moral project. It's a bit like feminism in some senses, in as much as it's trying to say, women are not just there as people, as objects. Women have a voice. Women should be respected. Women are part of equal citizens. And in a way, some of that is what's driving this discussion of children's agency. As I've said already, it's central to a rights-based approach in the US, according to the UNCRC. But agency is commonly recognized only in relation to acts that we consider to be pro-social. So for example, when children act in ways that we consider adult, it's not considered to be agency. So in my own work, I've looked a lot at child soldiers. Most organizations will not accept that children voluntarily join military groups. That's not seen as something that's agency. That's not agency. If a 15-year-old joins a military group, somebody has forced that 15-year-old to join up. A child couldn't possibly choose to join a military group. Well, in my own experience, children do, because it's often the best strategy to protect themselves and to survive. But it's not seen as agency. Children are agents, according to many organizations, when they call for peace. But when they engage in violence, they're not agents. They're victims. Okay? So there's a very strong moral dimension to the ways in which we understand agency. Alternative to that, and perhaps in some senses complementary, is an empirical perspective. It's not pushing agency as a moral point of view, but it's saying in what circumstances, in what ways are children able to positively influence their circumstances. It's concerned with exploring how they do that. And also, it's interested in all the constraints that prevent them from actually positively influencing their circumstances. So this is where we get into issues about poverty, about discrimination, also about patriarchy. The assumptions that children are incapable, because they're children, or because they're female, will affect the ability of young people to actually act, because you will simply prevent them, or do as much as you can to prevent them from acting in ways that will enable them to change their lives in ways that they would wish. So out of that, am I right for time? A couple more minutes? Out of that, we get a number of questions arising. So when do we, and where do we see children being agents? Is it just in the places that we approve of? And I'll give you one example. A colleague of mine did a very interesting study of Bhutanese refugee children in Nepal, where Save the Children had set up a big project of children's participation with all kinds of forums and all kinds of activities, street theatre and so on, trained young people to run their own groups and do all these activities. And this was given as an example of children's participation and children's agency. The skills, the techniques, the networks that children learned through Save the Children, they then used in their work with the Bhutanese Maoist movement, which was a violent revolutionary movement, went around and threatened other refugees in the camps, yeah, and pushed for a kind of political change. Now that wasn't seen as participation, that wasn't seen as agency, because it didn't fit the morals, the moral perspective of the organization that had set up. But in a sense, from the point of view of the children, it was simply pursuing their own goals, but by different means. So it's very important how we understand it. What do we do about children who are perpetrators of violence? Are they agents? Or can children only ever be victims of violence? Can a child be both a victim and an agent? So if you are sexually violated, 4 minutes? No, it's fine. If children are violated, are child soldiers, are they also agents at the same time? Can they be both? Can you be a victim and an agent? How do we focus on violations without pushing this idea of children as passive victims? And that's really challenging. How do we actually achieve that? What do adults do when children ask for things that they don't agree with? We had a bit of discussion about that before. If children are saying we want to deal with corruption, if children are saying the factory owner is exploiting me and my friends, what's our response? What's our responsibility to that? If we act in ways that are different from the aspirations that are expressed, on the grounds of children's best interests, it's not in your interest that we actually help you to do that. Are we not being paternalistic? Are we not denying children's agency? Are we not reinforcing a status quo? And how should child-focused organizations work in order to address the constraints upon children from acting to change their circumstances? Yeah. So how do they actually work alongside children to recognize and address things, not just through changing the laws, but also changing exploitation, discrimination, patriarchy, inequality, and poverty? An agency for children to be able to change their circumstances in ways that they would wish entails an awful lot of other changes taking place. It cannot just be limited to children on their own. And my experiences, and this goes to a response that came up in the last panel, it's my last point. In my experience, when you invite children in to participate in something, with the view that they can somehow change their circumstances, and that change doesn't happen, children don't go, oh, well, fair enough, I tried. Under some circumstances, and I've seen it in a number of cases, they will get involved in violent change. Because they've tried the way that the NGO suggested, it doesn't work. So when someone else comes along and say, here's a gun, this is the way you're going to achieve what you want, they're that much more ready to take that step. Thank you.
Yes, and talk about children as act in improving their life and environment, and must be a partner in changing their life. So we need to understand children's abilities and what they can affect and do in their environment as human beings. I will talk about now my third. I'll talk about special education program in Jordan. Refugees children can benefit from. Services in Jordan, disabled children, refugees children can benefit from. At first, I want to say about we have two kinds of refugees children, poor and rich refugees. Poor children can benefit from the services provided to Jordanian children, like the Jordanian children. But the rich refugees children, they can benefit from private sector to education and take another services, social and another services, because and some of their parents have investment and projects, make some investment in Jordan. With regard to the services in Jordan, all of them can benefit from. We have a comprehensive early childhood development strategy began or launched in 2000. which aim to improve quality and quantity of education in Jordan and including healthy care. What the services the refugee children can benefit from in Jordan. They can benefit from nurseries, services and kindergarten, government and private. There's also baby care centers for disabled children. They can benefit from it. We have also schools. We have inclusion services in school. We have, I think, 700 resource rooms. All children can benefit from it, in addition to refugees' children. In addition to 10 school for deaf and children with visual impairments. These services provided by many ministry, education ministry or government sector and international organizations like UNICEF and UNRWA. For example, UNRWA opened 10 special schools for deaf students. The number of refugees children can benefit from these services. We don't have any information about it, but all of them can benefit from any services provided for Jordanian students. But we have some challenges and limitations. One of these challenges, as you know, and I will talk about, financial limitation and restricted resources. In Jordan, we didn't have many resources and can benefit from. So what we can give our children, we give the refugee children, especially disabled children. And other refugee children can benefit from any services provided for Jordanian children. Another limitation is information. Some parents of the refugee children didn't have enough information about the services in Jordan, where they can go with their children, disabled children, or where they can take their child to have social or education or healthy services. In general, this is some of the limitation they face in Jordan. But in general, I think they have good services in Jordan, and the government try to make a good plan for give them quality services according to their resource. Thank you. Now, move to Kristen.
Hi, sorry, I just ran out. It's part of my wearing many hats here. And I suppose as the getting the last word by default, I wanted to maybe pick up a little bit of where Jason left off in terms of thinking about what agency means in practice. And we've heard a lot today about how, over the 2 days, about how different statuses, refugee, undocumented, and so forth, are not only tied to the state, but rooted in histories. We've thought a bit about the ways that these sort of categories get constructed. And we've tried to think about how those come to bear on children, and particularly thinking about their agency now. I suppose from looking, for example, at the undocumentary about kids, I found it interesting that the way, part of what I saw in the interviews with some of the young people in this film was that they sort of resist these categories that are placed upon them, right? Because they don't see themselves in them, right? They want to, and part of that is a strategy, right? To be a normal kid, right? Not to be a refugee kid or an alien or what have you. So they're speaking to power by doing that, right? By saying that's not who I am. Sometimes though, what happens is a lot of the work that I do I look at the failure in some ways, I suppose it sounds negative, but I sometimes examine the failure of rights discourses to become actionable. And what that means is sometimes that young people, when they're not successful in calling upon their rights, they have to, their default survival strategy sometimes becomes to embrace the very category that marginalizes them in the first place. I saw this with working with child soldiers, saying, hey, I'm just a child soldier, I'm a victim, can't you help me? Because to say I have rights to this and this and this don't always work for them, right? And in terms of what you mentioned about sort of the sort of victim or agent question, one resource comes to mind. There's a film called Ezra, E-Z-R-A, and it's about a child soldier in Sierra Leone. It's a film done. It's a theatrical movie, but it's really excellent. It's showing how this kid who's actually on trial before the Sierra Leone tribunal is not either a victim or a perpetrator of the war. He's both, right, at the same time. So I just thought of that. Some of the work that I do is around orphans. And the same kind of thing I saw there, that there's a book on child rights. There's a picture of the cover there coming out in January, edited by Olga Nieuwenhuis from Amsterdam and Provensen from Switzerland. Part of what I saw there was that an orphan child cannot walk into a school and say, I have a right to education, educate me. So what they say is, I'm a poor orphan, I lost my parents, can't someone help me, right? So they actually default to this sort of vulnerability position. So I wonder, is it the same with refugees? I don't work with refugee populations myself, but as we were talking through this whole workshop, I was thinking, are there ways in which children might say, no, I'm not a normal kid, I am a refugee, I am an asylum seeker. I think some of you from Youth Without Borders really embrace that position and try to empower it, right? So I think there's a number of different ways we could look at how that happens. And part of what I also like to do in my work is to try and inhabit these contradictions and sort of detangle the paradoxes of humanitarian intervention. So just as I think we need to deconstruct categories like vulnerability, and I put an article out here about a special issue we did on deconstructing childhood vulnerability. We need to take it apart and see who formulates it, how, why, what are their stakes in it, what are the consequences, particularly for children, not only for children but for various actors. And I think we need to do that, of course, with agency. There is a lot of talk in childhood studies about agency, and I think we're beyond whether kids have it or not. But of course, it's often constrained. It's constrained by the very immediate material circumstances. And when we look at populations like dislocated children, it's not a question of whether or not they have the capacity to some extent, but to what extent is it constrained? So maybe it's this empirical approach, right? To what extent is it really constrained by these very immediate circumstances? And how can we alleviate, if we're interested in helping that situation, how can we alleviate or sort of remove some of the obstacles to children who are fulfilling that? So maybe some people who work particularly with dislocated children and youth maybe those are some questions I'm posing to you. Are there some practical ways we might think about in wrapping up this workshop and how we can help sort of remove the obstacles to children really having their voices heard, but also having actionable rights in the end. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Now I will open the floor for question and discussion. Anyone have a question?
I'll just add to what you were saying, that in my experience working with Kurdish minors who are claiming asylum in the United Kingdom, we have problems in anyone accepting responsibility for these children. So with their legal representative, I'm not just fighting the Home Office for their status, I'm also fighting the Iranian ethnic groups to actually acknowledge the fact that these kids are from Iran and Kurdistan. Politically, for these ethnic political groups, it's not good to admit that kids are leaving. For some reason, they like to think that their community cares for these children and they don't flee paying £5,000, £6,000 journey. Families going into poverty to send these kids out. And they say, oh, they're not Iranian, they're Iraqis. So not only do we have to fight the authorities for the status for these children. We also have to fight for some kind of community group, peer group, to actually accept us so they can be supported. And these kids are, in my opinion, are double vulnerable, and we've had terrible situations with them. And to come back to the point that you made, these kids, according to convention, the Refugee Convention, are entitled to seek asylum, even at 13, 14. And they're also protected by child welfare laws. And they are given discretionary leave or humanitarian protection up to age 18. And then at 18, they are deported. And it's at that stage that you appeal the fact that their asylum application was rejected 3 or 4 years ago. So at that stage, they're not applying for asylum, they're actually they're appealing against a decision that was made against them 4 years earlier, 3 years earlier. So it's very difficult because they've got nothing, they've got nowhere to go back to, and they've got nowhere to stay, no one's fighting in their corner. And I've seen horrible cases of self-mutilation and attempts of suicide because they just have nothing. They feel that they belong nowhere, that no one wants them, and they've got no future. And I don't know who can address this, and I don't know who can protect the rights of these children. But it's very, very difficult to fight on your own with just the legal representative when nobody owns these children and they've got nothing to go back to. So that is something to think about and to consider. And can I just make a point about, we've heard a lot about Egypt today, and some of the projects are so exciting and so wonderful and so positive, but I just wonder how real they are and how they are actually affecting children. And going by the vast population that we've heard are suffering from poverty and are street children and whatever, and it's not just to you, it's to all the Egyptians who are here today who talk about it. What is the catchment area or the or group? How wide can, say, screens cover or child to child? How many children can it reach? How real are these projects in proportion to the population that needs this kind of support?
Another question? Maybe answer until the end. Another question? No one?
Okay, I will ask and will say to you my experience in this program. We make a small classes to these children, working with children or dropout children or children in the school. We make a small classes from 10 to 15 number of these children, and make one lecture in the week along about the project. We implement the project about child protection, who children work in agriculture, and make the classes in the period of the project to help the children to know the rights and how to acquire and how to about themselves and saving and to be annoyed and to be say I am a child.
بتسألي كم العدد؟ how many؟ يعني كل العدد؟
I think the numbers is 15 or 100 children. No, I don't know. It's my project. I don't.
But in Muqattam area,
I don't. The whole number of children in this project in Egypt, I don't know. But I say about my project in Egypt.
One, I imagine to some extent there's an urban bias. No, Heather,
I think that the issue that was brought by Dr. Hani regarding bringing in the religious institutions, especially in societies in the Middle East, is very important because I have been, for example, following and in touch with the projects of one of the Islamic charity organizations, basically, and it has got 5,000 mosques all over the country, and the number of registered orphans, and we're not talking about children who had no parents, or children whose parents just left them or deserted them, or children outside the marriage bond. We're talking about court. We're talking about the mother and the child, and the father died for different circumstances, in accidents, died out of health conditions, whatever. The number registered in the project is 750,000. And these children...
With the 5,000 also.
Yeah, all over the country. We have 750,000 child registered, and they are looked after, even if the amount of money given to them by this charity organization is called the Shariah, is minimum. I mean, 30 pounds, 40 pounds. But when you're talking about dire poverty in Upper Egypt, for example, villages, the 40 pounds can sort of guarantee food for the child for the whole month. And then they also take care of the mother. So they try to give them allow them to work on artifact sort of skills, and then they have them send that out in not bazaars, but like one-day markets, or in the mosque itself during Fridays, etc. So if you compare this with the number of students, the number of youngsters or young people or children in programs run by UN or run by initiatives in civil society, there's no that you can compare the numbers at all. And the access of churches and mosques to children all over the country, and the services provided by mosques and churches is huge. So, but this is kept outside the study of many of the academic work, and they focus only on civil society because they want to go to NGOs, make a sample on 100 child or young people, and then they easily can come out with results. So we have a serious problem here regarding weight and number and accessibility. And I think that a lot of what is under the umbrella of the religious community or communities of faith needs to be investigated, for good or for bad. I mean, some things are related to discrimination, and women are held but kept in the position, so they had within a patriarchal system, children the same, young girls the same, but at the end of the day, the amount of effort and the scale of the impact is wider. So I think that we have to take that into consideration as well.
But for me, there's a bigger question behind all of this. There's a lot of well-meaning organizations, from UNICEF down to a very local organization, a religious, non-religious, whatever. But where's the wealth? It's like we're putting a Band-Aid over a gaping wound. How many billions of dollars of Egyptians' money was spent buying arms that the Egyptians don't need because their officials were bribed into buying it from US and European arms companies? That is money that could be spent providing education, providing healthcare. Why should everybody be running around trying to get $30 here, $40 there, to stop people from starving to death, when their leadership, and this is not just Egypt, this is in so many countries of the world, are throwing away people's money, they're avoiding taxation themselves, they're involved in all kinds of corruption, money is shoved into Swiss bank accounts and God knows where, and we're running around trying to pull little pieces of little bits of money together to stop people starving to death. And I feel, we should all, if we're serious about this, we have to start looking at the bigger picture and not just focus on, can I help 50 children here, can I help 100 children there? Because it's like there's a flood coming of corruption.
We had this discussion this morning about Somalia and the amount of money that's gone into Somalia, but it hasn't filtered down to...
let me give you an example.
That we need a political solution.
Absolutely. Andrew Epstein's book on the global arms trade, you have to read it. UK government has given 6 million to Tanzania. Tanzania, the leadership of Tanzania was bribed by UK arms companies to spend Tanzanians' money way beyond $6 million, or £6 million that it was given by the UK government. The more money is leaving or being spent on things that people don't need, and the arms trade, the arms companies in the UK are part and parcel of the UK government. We've seen it over and over again. But we don't look at that. We just look at the aid. We look at trying to pull little pieces together. We don't look at the bigger picture. And we have to start doing that. I really want to.
Yeah, and I think that's part of even very vaguely I referred to, very difficult circumstances, but one of them is, global neoliberal capitalism, right? I mean, it's a huge issue in terms of even looking at deconstructing vulnerability. Part of what we talk about is, the business of aid, right? And so it does pay sometimes. You know, I mean, right down to the kid who like it pays to be a refugee or a child soldier. I'm a poor whatever kind of kid who NGOs are giving money to. So let me pose as that very person they're looking for, right? And the work I do on orphans is very similar in that no one uses the local word for orphans in the local dialect in Uganda where I work. It's a very pitiable stage. You don't say it to a child's face, right? But when the NGOs come along, it's like, here are my orphans, in English, orphans, orphans, orphans. You've got lots of orphans for you to get money for. So, you know, there is I mean, aside from these sort of the money getting siphoned off, the money that goes into humanitarian work, of course, also gets spent in particular ways that don't necessarily get to people on the ground, but they're also playing the same game, trying to grab at what they get, and then, you know, someone else is trying to grab right down to the last little bit. So, you know, there are these bigger global issues aside from, you know, we're talking about within countries across different borders, but these are global issues as well, so they're quite complex.
More or less, we have talked in the last 2 days about similar different issues. I think on the normative level, more or less, we have common values or base which we can take and work with it. My question is for me, what to do. I think we have more or less the whole picture, and we have different examples from different parts of the world, and I think the next step should be is to go in the activism, political activism. I think that only talking about something won't help us to change something. And of course we won't be able to change the world. Maybe not tomorrow, later. We have to have some visions to try it. Like I said, or in my presentation, if we don't fight, we have lost. But if we try, maybe we'll, maybe not. But I think that's also what we do in Germany all the time. Maybe I won't be able at the end to get my rights. But on the other side, now not we, others, I think more or less we know who's we and who's on the other side. They shouldn't be able to sleep in peace at home. And that's my approach how to deal with it. And at the end, if I have anything in my hand, but I know there was someone who couldn't sleep in peace. And I think we try maybe to find something with, how we can deal all together against these issues.
There was a union activist who said, agitate, educate, and organize. Right? So first you get people upset, and then enough to learn something about it, and then you do something about it. Right?
I liked what they said this morning about naming people as deportation ministers and then shaming them. We're going to use that in England. I like that idea.
But one minister said he's very proud to get this prize because he said that this show the society that he is making his work good.
He's doing the right job.
And he's very proud to have this prize. I just wanted to say something that the problem is by fighting for children's rights is that I started to fight for my rights. I was a child, but now I am 27 and I will fight for the rights of my children. So you fight for the rights of the next or the over next generation, and you will not see a lot of results now. And that is the problem with these visions and dreams. You cannot see so quick result. So maybe my children will have the rights in Germany or on the whole world.
But sorry. I was going to say, I mean, this is a huge project, I think. What we're trying to do, and the CRC is just the beginning. I think we're trying to change the world and make it into a place that's fit for children, in which all children have access to decent services, all children are protected and so on. And that is massive. That is changing in ways societies operate, to actually put children at the centre. So of course it's going to take generations. But if we only limit ourselves to the immediate and say, well, I've managed to help 100 children to prevent them from starving, important though that is, but if we only do that and don't look at the bigger picture, then where are we going? We're just running faster and faster just to stand still. And we need to have that vision.
If I could add to that, when I talk about, I sometimes have given talks, to college level lectures where I sort of critique the humanitarian interventions, say on behalf of orphans, and often the first question I get from young people is, well, then what should we do? And sometimes I've actually got the question, well, then who should we give our money to? Like, at least in the US context, it's like, well, what charities are good to give our money to then if these ones are not so great, or if they're actually doing more harm than good? And my answer to that is not, well, don't go look for a new charity to give your money to necessarily, but get involved politically, right? Especially for coming from the US context, it's a very powerful nation. And so, I tell them, well, you have to get involved politically, call on your government to cancel the debt. Call on your government to, do things that are pro-child. So it's about, getting them politically active. But, often their mindset is, well, but who do we give our money to? And who's going to handle it well, right? Rather than actually doing something. So, try and encourage them to be politically active.
There's actually what, I think, and Anne's still here, she's gone, but what Anne was saying yesterday on the question that I posed, the shared responsibility of the industrialized countries that are hosting refugees. What is their portion of responsibility for these refugees to be where they are? And they have to be accountable, they have to assume responsibility. And it's not enough to create a problem, a conflict, sell your arms, and then have this exodus of Afghani refugees and Iraqi refugees and Iranians.
That you won't take, yeah.
And they have to be accountable for what they're doing. And if we can come up with a policy of making these countries responsible for their policies abroad in selling their arms and whatever, I think we've done a great thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's why you have to make, and especially young people in these countries, agents of change, right? I mean, usually young people have a very keen sense of justice. So when I talk to college undergraduates in the US, and they get very excited to do these things because they don't always know them, right? So again, it's educate, and organize.
Just to follow up on what Roy just said, it's true that actually 4/5 of the world's refugee populations are hosted by developing countries. So exactly the countries that you mentioned, Afghanistan, Iran, the Middle East, Africa, of course. So it is definitely a problem, but the international community is aware of it and has called repeatedly on European governments and the Western industrialized rich countries to do their share, but at the end of the day, they are sovereign states and nobody can, as an international community, as organizations, it's very difficult to put pressure on them. It has to come from within. I think, as Kristen was saying, it has to be driven by an agenda, an internal agenda, and otherwise chances of change are very slim, sadly.
Finally, I think we finish our time in this session. Thank you for in this session.
Thank you all for being involved and coming, and I think those were good notes to end on. So give yourselves some applause. So I'll wrap up then. I just have a few quick announcements. One is that we're very short on name tags, so I was asked to tell you to please put your name tag in the box out there when you leave. The others, I will try to post pictures and videos that have been taken of the workshop, and then we'll send around a link to our coordinators. So, just a flattering photo. And if people are leaving from here tomorrow or Sunday, I did look on the train website, and it says there are no trains between Leiden, which is the next town between us and the airport. So between Leiden and the airport, there are not trains. So you need to give yourself an extra half hour, 45 minutes if you're going to take the train to the airport, because you have to do a little kind of run around. They're doing maintenance on the track. But as far as tonight, if people are going out tonight, I haven't, at least, things happen at the last minute, but I didn't see any announcements about any scheduled interruptions. So That was it. But again, I just want to thank everyone for coming and being actively involved, and I hope that you've gotten something out of it.
And I wanted to thank Kristen for all the hard work, and you did really a great job.
Well, and Charmony's not here, and she's sort of the invisible hand, but she's our staff administrator, so she did a lot of putting together all the sort of logistical details that needed to happen for the workshop. So that's on tape for the record. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, for now, but like, I mean, can't always count that. No schedule. They have to close down this part. So just schedule Saturday, Sunday for that
Thank you. Having this discussion.
Please take materials on the table. There's all these organizations brought their materials.
Yes, I think it's a store with yes, okay, I'll meet you there.
Just a few, yeah. I didn't know. Just if you see them. You guys are traveling together. I don't know. Maybe you'll be back here.
As if you one is
because normally, yeah, I think
Have you read Love's work on drug dealers in Spanish? I would have students read that because it's kind of a question. Nobody will resort to crime. It's very much rational choice theory. Like you work in these crap jobs in the factory where everyone talks down to you, or you can start selling crack on the street, which is highly dangerous, but it earns about, in a day, about $20,000. And I have a day job. Take care of your family. Puerto Rican guys in Spanish Harlem are like, there's no choice here, right? Like we can, we can do one thing, or we can support our families with real land, and it's all tied up in this sort of idea.
higher punishment would be effective because it's a rational choice. Then if you punish,
they're more trying to be killed by each other, actually. I mean, he's not saying it's a good thing. He's saying, it doesn't, it makes communities implode from the inside out. But the problem is, they try and work according to the rules, and they
محدش علمني الاسراف غيرها.
بس الولاد اتبسطوا
المره اللي فاتت في برلين كده الرحله كانت.
saying yes
بنات قالوا ده طنط يعني شجعتك على قلت لهم حاجات كويسه خالص. على فكره في سي ان دي في المانيا احسن من هنا.
كتير.
يبقى مليان ونضيف.
لا وحش هنا ومفيش
مفيش حاجه. اوكي يلا يا ريت بالسرير كده. ده احنا راجعين 4 عشان نحكي. ده يعني اكتر من كده. اوكي ان شاء الله توصلوا بالسلامه. بكره ان شاء الله. مش طيران داتي روح الحد.
They're at their hangout, and this guy walks in, who's like a rival gang, and they all have number baseball bats. And sort of escapes with them.
اه
We have to maintain our competitors, right? You know, this is our territory. Yeah, have you seen that movie? On trial.
ان شاء الله يعني حاول تتشطر شويه. روح للفاضي.
And he goes back and it sort of becomes all these flashbacks as he's recounting.
لا ما انا خلاص رايحه النهارده في السيارة.
رايحه السلامه. وصل بالسلامه ان شاء الله. نظبط مع علاء كده كده مع بعض. نعمل سيشن كده.
Okay, thanks so much for coming, and yeah, I hope leave your here. We'll be talking. There's these little literature racks.
دكتورة هبة السلام عليكم. ان شاء الله نشوف حضرتك على خير بكره باذن الله. رايحين معانا في نفس الطياره ان شاء الله. باذن الله. من مصر.
Yes. Let me know seriously.
okay.
We also have programs running on public policy. So I will send you the agenda.
Okay. I hope so. السلام عليكم.
دكتورة هبة أسلم عليكي. باي.